the latest in Azure with Greg Leonardo.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. This podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies that are using .NET and Azure. We build mission-critical software and rescue failing projects, empowering software delivery with a proven approach. I'm excited to announce that my latest book is now fully released. This book is about software leadership. It's called The 5 Pillars: Leadership for Effective Custom Software. And the book is for anyone who is attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. And if you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book is for you. Teams are also doing book studies and discussions around it, and I'm excited about that. And so if you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, just send me an email and I'll get it to you. And of course, you can also go online and search and buy the print copies. And for those of you who are in lead architect or software executive roles, you might want to join our monthly forums. These are interactive, deeply technical sessions that I really enjoy facilitating, and you can sign up for them on clearmeasure.com. And today, we have a returning guest on the show, Greg Leonardo. He was last on episode 282 around optimizing cloud budgets in Azure. Greg is a cloud architect that assists organizations with cloud adoption and innovation, and he's currently the head of Microsoft Cloud Services at Built Global. He's also the founder of Webinology. He posts on a daily cloud blog, clouddailywire.com. And he's been working in the IT industry since his time in the military. And he's a developer, a teacher, a speaker, an early adopter. He's worked in many facets of IT throughout his career and is currently the president of Tampa Dev, a community meetup that runs Tampa Code Camp. You can find that at hashtag TampaCC. Also, various technology events throughout Tampa. And Greg also holds a certification as a Microsoft Certified Azure Solutions Architect Expert and Microsoft Certified Trainer, and is also a Microsoft Azure Most Valuable Professional, MVP. Greg, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, sir. How about yourself?
I'm great. I think you've been on the show, what is it, over four times now. So The listeners can go back in the archives and look at those. So great to have you back and talking about the latest in Azure. We just had a .NET Conf release .NET 9 and some new announcements around custom software. And I want to kind of ask you about that, but we're getting new listeners every day. And for those who aren't really familiar with you, you kind of wouldn't mind going back and say, what were the highlights that got you into your focus on Azure in your career?
I think a lot of how I got here was just basically around being an innovator. Like I think we've discussed this before. I'm the last 10% guy. So I see things a lot different than others. So when Azure came along, I saw that possibility of having compute as a utility and really being able to leverage it is almost like your utilities that you have now. You plug your app into the cloud and bam, it works. So it was really kind of around innovation and making things easier. I mean, the big points, on the world out there is, how do you get started as a business? Where can you, maximize your cost benefits, different things like that as people were coming up. So it was really great to help people understand how to leverage technology to get their business to a much better place.
Nice. And from your point of view, again, the .NET Conf just kind of had a whole bunch of .NET 9 announcements, and Azure keeps on moving fast and furious. What are the new things that have caught your attention, let's just say over this past year?
Well, a lot that has come in is like privatized workloads in Azure, looking at privatized endpoints, looking at things like zero trust, quantum computing, and the advances in AI. I mean, one of our talks, I think talk number 3, we talked about AI and responsible
Hmm.
AI. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of that has kind of rushed into the market. Where's it going to be? What's it going to eliminate? And those sort of things. So it's really been an interesting year to kind of reflect on, to understand, where is software development going? How is AI going to affect that? Where's the cloud going to step in at that point? Because there is kind of a sway right now of folks moving back from the cloud on prem because of what we discussed last time, which is the cost matrix. So, there is trying to find that happy balance. And it's kind of taking that forefronted approach on discussing with people is how can they maximize these things in the cloud without trying to bring them back in and suffer the same problems, because you have that learning curve all over again, right? While you move to the cloud, now you pull it back in, you have the same problems that push you to the cloud to begin with.
Yeah.
So, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think people really need to start understanding that there's no silver bullet to this technology, that you really need to start working on, mapping it up and understanding where your costs go and where your cost benefits are at, right? Like you and I always know in our history, right? The bank doesn't really care about security until there's a breach. Then the
Yeah.
breach causes security now to go up. So we've got to get out of this facet of learning, from the problems versus the mistakes, right? It's okay to make a mistake along the way as long as you're working or something. But when you create a problem that then somebody exploits, that's another story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point about the pendulum swing of everybody go to the cloud, put everything in the cloud. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's really expensive. Maybe I want something local.
Yep.
And we both got kids at home, and I see the schools really using a lot of Chromebooks and Google Apps and Microsoft 365 documents, and it's kind of like that stuff is going to the cloud. There's the document in the office work, but then there's the servers, and two different dimensions. The mass market is, do I put my normal files in the cloud? Do I use Google Drive? Do I use OneDrive? And then for custom software development teams, it's okay, where's my server going to run? Or
Yep.
which servers? And it seems like when the cloud was out, it was rush to the cloud, use cloud for everything. And now
Yep.
it's coming back. It's like, well, okay, maybe it's just another tool. Maybe we use it for some good stuff, but
Right.
we use either our own data centers, or in some cases, seems like there's new opportunities to putting a small computer on your desk, kind of like
Yep.
new opportunities for edge computing. How are you thinking about that spectrum?
Right. You've got to remember one of the big key factors is, if you remember back in the day, this is around like 2007 ish, it was the cloud. Everything
Oh,
moved
yeah.
to the cloud.
Yeah.
Then the cloud started getting up there. Then it was DevOps. We've got to do DevOps. And then I remember when, I believe it was Darren that came out and was the DevOps. And then, it moved over to now AI. So now you see all this stuff with AI, and it's AI. And it's like, that now it's quantum computing is starting to come back. I just saw a thing the other day, and I actually did a blog post on it, on the quantum computing side. So the interesting side to me is, I think the world's figuring out that there's not one silver bullet that makes the business function better.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it got into the points where I see, the working from home and the not working from home and all these different things. And you start looking at things going, look, I think the world is what we refer to as a hybrid. I think it has to have a blended nature of things, right? There are going to be folks that have the ability to work from home. There are going to be folks that are not.
Mhm.
There are going to be folks that require a desktop PC. There's going to be folks that don't.
Yeah.
There are going to be folks that require AI to augment their job, and then there are going to be folks that are not, right? So I think there's a point here that we rush to judgment quickly, where we go, this is the way you got to be, and then we figure out that judgment may have not been right,
Yeah.
and that we've got to back off of that a bit, and maybe it is a hybrid model. I remember talking to Microsoft when the cloud first came out, and arguing profusely with them about hybrid models, that it wasn't to the cloud, it was having a blend of both. And they fought me and fought me. And I went and did a roadshow showing how it all worked for them and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, the hybrid became the thing, right? So I think, as we roll forward, we have to understand that there's no silver bullet. You do the things you need to do from an individual basis to make your individuals productive. And that's kind of the bigger thing. There is no facet that you can throw out there and make everybody just as successful as everybody else. That's not how it works. People are motivated differently. Their jobs are motivated differently behind what they need to do. And why would you send somebody to a Chromebook that requires a heavier
Hmm.
desktop usage, like doing video design or something like that, but you put them on a Chromebook that takes them, a
Yeah.
1,000% more hours to get something done. You've got to look at where, you can streamline your business to make everything more productive. And over the past year, that is the biggest thing that I've taken in with AI rocketing forward and all of this stuff. There are ways to make you more productive. And that's the thing I think people need to focus on is one, how to get themselves to a happier point. Look at things in their life like, if working from home is important or not, what you need to do there. What is quality of life to you? How do you balance work with quality of life while still being as productive as you can the times that you work,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the big key. You and I have learned that over the years that we could spend 80 hours a week doing stuff, but at the end of the day, we still don't get as much done as we thought we would even at 80 hours. When is the cutoff? You know, I think we talked about it in one of our episodes that, back in the day, we had this thing where, the computer age was coming up and it was going to be so great because you're only going to work like 20 to 30 hours a week when computers are born because your job's going to get so much simpler. And then computers got here and we ended up working 60, 70 hours a week
Yeah.
because they put more on our plate. So I think the idea is that people are now finding that there's a point between how to get technology adoption in play and how to deliver the best value for the buck.
Yeah. And what's actually necessary? Because,
Yep.
like you mentioned, working number of hours, working, overtime, chasing something new versus just, what? Here's something that's sustainable, and we'll just go at this pace and let it be. Because there's always the next bonus that you could chase, or work
Yep.
more hours for some reason to chase the
Yep.
next car to buy. And
Yeah.
or I grew up on beans and cornbread. My belly was full. Whatever, I'm happy, and my wife thinks I'm crazy because I'm actually happy eating beans and cornbread.
Well, it's amazing in the world the happiness that we came from. I mean, you and I are the generation before social media, right? So
Yeah,
our
and
point
cords on
wasn't
our phones.
right. Our voice wasn't the matter of how many likes we got or seeing things, but that we always wanted to be noticed by each other, and how we interacted. And I think today's, big point and big push out there is how do we leverage technology to make our lives easier? And what is it that we need to do from a business perspective that we can offload to technology to allow our businesses to grow? I mean, there's people out there that they either get the technology and the new stuff or they don't, right? Because that's the focus of the blog posts that I put together is how as an entrepreneur is he supposed to know how to engage folks in these arenas, right?
Hmm.
How does somebody know they get a good technology person to assist them, right? To where it's not somebody out there that's just out there to rake in money or something like that. So there's a fine edge comb because you and I both know that our industry has suffered on both scales, right? We've got very fast growth with people that don't like change. And then we also have folks out there that because it's cloud, because it's new, nobody knows how to gauge it yet. So people can exploit that a little bit for profit because nobody else out there is going to do it. And then you see that back off as it goes in, and then they go chase another thing. And I think that's the biggest thing I've learned over the past years. Stop chasing the new things, but learn how to adopt when the new things become relevant.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
Well, with so many new services coming to Azure all the time, I think a couple of years ago, I was interviewing someone who worked in Azure, and they said that 2/3 of the custom software usage was just Azure App Service. And that
Yep.
was like the mega. So do we know, is that still the case? Or there's always the new stuff, and then there's the very small number that are just tried and true. We know it works. Or do we really need to reach out for the next new Azure service, or wait for the dust to settle and see which ones are going to have staying power?
I think it's too forward, right? So let's look at where things have come along. You and I have been in the development arena for many years, right? We've seen the comings and goings of the Razors, the .NETs, things like that. But JavaScript and responsive design have always been there. We used to call it DHTML in the early days, then it was
Yep.
JavaScript, then it was, you know, and you start looking at things that become tried and true that are basically you can put lipstick on a pig, but they're still the same thing, right? But when you look at things like these frameworks that come out, they're always more fundamental ways to accomplish something so they don't have to write. The big thing that made C sharp the big point was you no longer had to write the windows that you wrote in your applications,
Mm-hmm.
right? You could kind of move your responsibility up the stack a little bit, which is the same way with the cloud, right? When you move to the cloud, your responsibility moves up the stack. When you go to AI and adopt AI, your responsibility moves up the stack. So I think a lot of this is changing our views. The problem that I have with that is like we see every day. We grew up in an arena with schools to where we had to learn the fundamentals. And when you skip the fundamentals and you move up the stack and you only teach the up the stack, people don't know how you got there.
Mm.
And I think that's a lot of what we have today is folks don't know how we've made it to where we're at or even seen those points or gone with those experiences. So you see you and I sitting in a room, we solve a problem much different than a person today that's been traditionally trained a different way because they don't look at things the way that we do. That's why I say I'm the last 10% guy only because I see things a little bit different than most. You're able to find problems. I was in working with a group the other day that were, they made a change to how security worked. And this group couldn't function anymore and they couldn't get their deploys to work. And I sat down with them for 5 minutes and got the problem resolved. And the point like that is they were like, well, how did you know how to do that? And I'm like, well, it goes back to the old Steam thing. The guy that comes and fixes the Steam engine knows exactly where to hit it with the hammer to get it to work.
Yeah.
It's the same point. I grew up in the arena knowing how we got here. So I'm able to look at this lower level stuff to find out where the problems are at. So it's a weird, constitution today of, how people get to where they're at and where they grow. And I really believe that we're missing a level still in there of an understanding of how we got here because that context matters in the technology,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Like using a calculator back in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Our kids jump into calculators today much quicker than you and I did.
Right.
So we know what goes into the math to get there. All our kids know is how to use the calculator to solve the problem.
Yeah. So with Azure and these flexible data centers of servers, I can see it still being useful for people who have built a computer for themselves and actually know what's going on inside each of those actual servers, in the cloud that somebody else maintains for us.
Yep. Well, that goes back to our cost discussion back in the day. When we talked about cost, if you don't understand what goes into a cost, how do you know how much you're supposed to pay for it at the end of the day?
Yeah.
So, there is a fundamentals, I think, that they're extracting out. And that extraction is also leading to people spending more money simply because they don't know how to wrangle it in.
I was watching a video with probably now a 20, 30, no, it must have been a 30-year-old video by Grace Hopper, who was the Navy admiral who developed COBOL and was a professor, and she did a whole bunch of other stuff, but she had a lecture and her perspective, even as, an elder in software engineering, is that over time, the longer we get into it, the older generation tends to complicate things. And the really smart people in their 20s look at it and say, why is it done this way? That's stupid. That's too complicated. Let's just do it this way. And then the older generation has to get a little bit of we've always done it this way and it's progressed this way. And we got to just and allow the really smart people of the next generation to challenge it and say, no, that's too complicated. Let's just do this. And largely they're right.
Yep. Well, it's a dual-edged sword, right? I mean, we get lured into complacency as we get older into the points of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
And the idea of where that steals from is the fact of innovation. But we're now hitting a point where all innovation costs some money. So, there is a happy median to find there. So I do see both sides of that coin, right? Which is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that's not a true statement because we refer to that as technical debt nowadays. That just keeps that credit card running in the back end over the years that eventually you're going to have to pay at some point in time. So, I get that point. In reflections to Azure very specifically, is I believe that the innovations that Azure and AI are going to be able to do together as far as the future of where compute is going to be amazing for things that we haven't even imagined today.
Mm-hmm.
But my caveat to all this is that we lose where we came from. And that's the bigger point to me. If you remember, our stories used to be passed along around a fire, right? And that's how people learned, was they learned their history by people communicating that history. I get worried that we lose our history simply because we no longer talk about it and
Mm-hmm.
how we got here. And so people lose that context of how we got here. And when things don't go right and they're way down here, somebody may not know how to go in and fix that again.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's true. With so much media, you got to be intentional about interpersonal and group conversations, and even the history of software. Because if we don't know how the software industry got to where it was, then we're gonna reinvent the wheel or make some of the same mistakes over again.
Think about all the iterations that you and I saw. Think about the fact that when we connected to the internet the first time, we used a 2400 baud modem that we listened to dial in behind us whenever we went in. And you knew exactly when the connection was being made, right? The amount of technology that I've seen in my lifetime, my kids are never going to be able to see that level of change. I mean, we went from Walkmans to portable CD players to boom boxes to what was it, iPods. And now our phone pretty much does everything that not only our music instruments did, but our technology screaming for TVs, our gaming systems, our computers are all wrapped up into a little phone that we carry around in our pocket each and every day.
Yeah.
And you start worrying about that because I think if you and I put it, the very first Apollo mission went to the moon with a 1/1,000,000th of the compute power of what this phone has.
Yeah. Well, but doesn't that make you think about what kind of software that you could actually build with just tiny, tiny, simple computers?
Yep.
As opposed to, I need a full-on modern computer or a full-on modern server. I mean, the marketing people tend to talk about the cloud and the edge, but that concept of the edge is like, okay, I just have a computer that is still more horsepower than the Apollo computers, but I just have a smaller computer and I can do some really interesting things.
Well, think about this. When you left out of town, you couldn't check on your house before. You had to call a neighbor that you had to wait to go over to your house to take a look at it. Now you log into your cameras. You can check your home. You can change your thermostat. You can leave your house with the thermostat not set right, and you can set it on the airplane wherever you're going. You have to think that there's a level that we've seen in our lifetimes to where it just flabbergasts me on where it is today and where that future is going to take it. As software development gets easier, as AIs start augmenting how that's done, and have the cloud help present that in a much more sustainable way, it's crazy to me on where we're going to go. And when we start entering in quantum computing, with the simple fact that quantum computing changes how computers actually work, is going to be amazing, at the end of the day, for how did we get to this particular point in our evolution, in our lifetime. We've seen more change in our lifetime than our parents did in their history, even during the Industrial Revolution. It's just amazing to me on the amount, because of the amount of technology that we turn over. In 2007, that's the first cloud, machine came out. It was a big container filled with Blade PCs.
Yeah.
They had it all cut apart. We got to walk through it. We got to see it. And we all were like, wow. And it had like 4 icons on the desktop when you logged into it. Right. And now go look at there. Dude, you have to run a search to find the things that you want. And, there's thousands of things that you can do with it, down to the point where it is almost not there yet, where you can plug your app into it. That's going to be the day when you can bring any app you want, plug it into the cloud, and be done. That's the point. That's where, you start looking at innovations, the low code things, from that perspective. Cost is still a little bit more than expected, but low code was exactly where it was supposed to be, right? I now just take my business process, I throw it up there, and I'm good to go. I don't have to have a developer to run that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But as we figured out throughout time, there is still a need for that technical resource to manage those things. And no matter where we go, there's still going to be that person that has to connect the dots and make things work and stuff like that. There may not be as many per se, but it is what it is. I think today's technology boom has come with the simple fact that there were going to be 10 million jobs in the next 5 years that were going to go unfilled in the technology arena. So they had to figure out something to fill that gap because there weren't going to be enough people to fill that gap.
Well, and it's still not.
So, right.
It's still not.
And it's, you and I know that point because we work in the industry every day. There are not enough people getting into the industry to support the industry. So the industry has to do something.
Yeah. So the question
and here we
I
are.
want to ask you about productivity, there's the concept of let's have someone who has different training, maybe the technical analysis, they're a whiz at Excel, and they can use low code tools to automate and do some pretty interesting things. And then you have people who have learned Visual Studio, C#, SQL Server, the full stack. There's the element of, we need more of these people. But then there's another angle of how do we make each of these people 10 times, 30 times as productive? What changes there in your mind?
Well, what changes there is that's where I think AI blossoms at the end of the day, right? The big point behind it is AI may not have that point to think on its own today and may require somebody to give it that input and prompting mechanism to get it. But you and I both know that our day would have gotten so much better when we were younger if we didn't have to sit down and hack through code for 8 hours a day, pumping out the code that we had to pump out.
Mm-hmm.
If you can just get to, you remember you and I, when the IDEs came out, it was great. They had scaffolding. We could just type some stuff and boom, a whole bunch of code would appear. And we were like, oh my God, that's hours worth of work saved. And we became more productive. I think AI is going to do that exact same thing. When AI can make the documentation, when AI can help us write the code, when AI can do the things that it needs to do to make us 10 times more productive, now we are 10 times more productive at what we can do. And that's where I think the benefit of all this comes out. And then when you throw Azure on top of that and the new .NET languages on top of that, you now have a recipe for people to be able to rapidly develop solutions without spending the years that it would take to get to those points, from our day.
The question that I haven't seen anybody answer is let's say that you got AI tools that help do some of the rote work and get code that actually is the same code that you would have written and you're happy with it. Okay, now you have more lines of code, but now you have more lines of code. And then you have to maintain more lines of code. And then when you have to change, you got to refactor more lines of code. I struggle with that because it's the same mindset from the diesel-powered or gas-powered trucks versus horse-drawn wagons. Instead of just getting, robots to drive, 10,000 horses so that you save on, horse drivers to move stuff, let's just make that obsolete. And now let's get to, a gas-powered, diesel-powered truck that can haul so much more. And so for me, I'm thinking, when I hear, AI will do the tasks, I'm thinking, wait a minute. Well, at some point, whether it's a human or a machine doing those tasks are going to be obsolete because we move a level of abstraction, right?
Right. Well, it's always going to be that way. I mean, you're talking manual processes versus automatic. The way I look at the automatic or technical problems, they're going to move at a much more rapid pace than us during an industrial time where we're taking mechanical things and making them into a new mechanical things. And as those mechanical things involve, I think what AI is going to do is it's going to be able to refactor that code. It's going to be able to keep on top of whatever's coming out today that a developer won't have to do, right? So I think there's an avenue of this that becomes that augmented side that the developer has to look and guide AI on exactly what it needs to do to keep the things in play, right? Because you're right to a point on the robot side. I mean, we've seen hundreds of movies from Terminator to iRobot on how robots and different things can benefit society, but how also they can become a negative on society. So I think we've got to find that happy balance in between what those are. Because at the end of the day, I started thinking about this the other day. At the end of the day, if AI starts, putting out robots, starts dumping everything out, starts writing code. There's no more need for the developers, testers, any of this stuff. Then where is the rest of the world left with the trillions of people that are out there? Where do they turn a living
Well, that's
at
not
that
going to
point?
happen anyway, because
You know,
this whole GPT era of technology is not creating new things. It's
nope.
giving you new combinations of
Yep.
data that it's already been trained with. So that's
Yep.
one thing unique with
Yep.
how God created us. Like, we are actually creative, whereas the machines are just, they just mix existing ingredients and new combinations. So
Well,
there's
they're
a fundamental
creative
difference there.
right. They're as creative as you are, right? So the whole point behind the prompt is you're dealing with a child that in the prompting mechanism starts growing a history of what can be done with context, right?
Yeah.
Going back to my point on the context discussion, right? Everything that we know about in the real world requires context of some sort. And that's the same way with AI. I view AI as nothing more than an augmentation, but it's an augmentation that I can use to do tasks I really don't want to do, right? Like if I wanted to go evaluate code and find out better ways to write the code, I can give it very specific instructions on how to do that, get it to spit something out I can review and get back 8 hours of my day for that. But at the end of the day, that's not going to go out and write innovative code. It's not
Right.
going to change the code in a way that's going to be innovative, right?
Yeah.
It's going to go through and find duplication and run it through its paces because it is very, black or white thing. It's going to go down all of its little paths and maybe
Yeah.
some gray enters in somewhere in there, but it's not going to try to invent anything new at that point unless you give it the explicit instructions on how to make it new, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same day you look in. I look at things like, book reviewers, all these other little things that are out there. I see as being almost a direct replacement. But at the end of the day, there has to be someone to tell it how to do the review and
Mm-hmm.
what is important about the review and things like that, because there is no free thinking. That was back to my original point. There's no free thinking in AI, so it's never
No,
going to be
just
its
pattern
own
matching.
thing. And I don't even know how you would do that at the end of the day. I know they've got robots and they're trying and they're all, but at the end of the day, we learn in a very specific way to where we draw and make lines of things throughout our life that correlate into something that makes us who we are at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you do that with computers, even if it's able to write its own line of codes, right? It has to really not only understand how to write that code, but how to write the experience,
Yeah.
which is not something that's quantifiable at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So I just look at it as being you and I are going to be augmented, like you see on all the sci-fi movies. We get bionic arms or bionic vision, or we get a memory upgrade or something like that. We become a better version of ourselves based on that. I think AI is just the beginning of that now. It's going to make the better version of us now because now we can do things in a much shorter time period than we were before. So I look at it as almost like automating ourselves sometimes. If that comes in, because I'll tell you, AI is saved a lot of what I do each and every day down to a little bit less of an amount than what it used to be. So it is what it is at the end of the day, if you use it right.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see a new higher level computer language emerging.
Yep.
Because when this GPT era of AI technology, one thing that it fundamentally requires is the prompt. Which
Yep.
right now we're still figuring out what makes a good prompt and context. And, you could paste in a table from Excel. You could paste in a fragment of JSON. You could paste in an English paragraph, and that's a prompt. But for software, if I'm thinking of all the repetitive code, just even at that level, if I draw a new screen, okay, now there's a whole lot of repetitive tasks. I know exactly how I want to lay it out. I've selected which control vendor, which controls I use. I have a certain number of layers to get to the data or call over a web service. And I have a certain structure, certain architecture that I've already laid out. Now I got to wire up got to touch a little bit of each layer, add a new class in different places. And it's not like it's complicated, but it's just a lot of touch points. And if there was a prompt language where it's been trained on the patterns and the code base, and I could say, okay, here's the shape of the new screen, wire it up. And then
Yep.
boom, it's all wired up. And then it's also, hey, give me give me a full system test using the Playwright framework that, will exercise this whole thing, and give me, scenario A, scenario B, scenario 3, and then it does it. And then I could see that as being something we're on the cusp of being able to do that. And then the creative part is, what architectural elements should I put, or what vertical slice of this particular application do I need to develop so that there is a design pattern implemented that then the AI tool can copy?
Right. See, that's when I think AI and quantum computing meet. I think that's going to be a very interesting time, because I think that's when that new language is going to come into account. Because you and I are ex-military, we've seen simulations run constantly, right? I mean, this is nothing new to us. We've had histories of watching simulations run in war simulations and all the things that we are trained on, which are seem to be that this is the correlation of all of those years coming out to the public now. And it strikes me as it strikes me as where it's going to go next, based on when some fundamental things change. And I think when the 64 base goes away and quantum computing steps in, and a computer has a different way to look at things, I think you're going to see that language creep in, and a new persona come out of that. Because at the end of the day, one of the things I've been working on my A strategies is giving AI my persona, right? Which is, what do I do? How do I approach things to see if it can apply my learnings to something that it can do? And it still struggles with it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not something that you can really go. So I don't know. Like I say, it's definitely a fun time from when we grew up. There's a lot of new things coming out. And I think one of the biggest things, I keep going back to is, one, how do these entrepreneurs that come up to the ball of wax that are really good at whatever they're doing get into this arena and understand what technologies are there? How can technologies make their life easier without them failing because they spent a lot of money on technology, trying to get their vision out the door when they're not good at that sort of stuff. So, I think there's a happy balance there to me.
Yeah. And one thing I caution younger people who are using a lot of the AI tools right now and getting a little bit over exuberant is to make sure that not to use any of the output of any of these AI tools that you don't actually understand. So I've seen too many examples where even people interacted with me that, send me something and say, hey, what do you think? And then, I read what they sent, and I'm thinking, this doesn't make any sense at all. And it comes back to, they used a tool that, and it kind of sounded like it might have hit the mark, but it's one thing to use a tool and say, hey, I really didn't know where to go with this, but the output of this, GPT tool sounded interesting. Is this even close? It's one thing to say that versus not even mentioning that you used an AI tool and and then say, hey, what do you think about this? Making me think that this is your opinion. And I read it, and it makes me think, are you an idiot? This doesn't make sense at all.
Well, you got to remember, AI fits under that old military pretense that we always had, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
If you ask it the wrong question and you don't frame the stuff right, you will get out exactly what you asked for.
Yeah. And of course, more and more people have heard stories like the lawyer who basically generated a legal filing and got sanctioned because it literally misquoted other judges in other cases in factually opposite material. He got sanctioned. It was bad news because he filed that in court.
Yep. Well, it goes back to that point, right? Which is, AI has to be black and white. It only can go some way. If you allow it to have bias, if you allow it to have anything that is not black and white and based on history, and it learns to lie, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get whatever the heck it picks out. It may fumble the facts. It may fumble the truth. And at the end of the day, that becomes real if it's said enough. We've lived enough of our life to understand that if you say it enough, it becomes real.
Well, this is where English English training is so important and research papers, because the citing of sources, if the citing of sources goes away, well, then you don't know what,
Yep.
you have no traceability. So that is
Yep.
anything has to have sources so that we can trace down to what work of others we're building on top of.
Well, and that's that we have the fortitude anymore to chase down that work, right? I mean, the idea of today is a lot of folks believe what is said over what is real. And that's a bad thing. And especially in technology. I don't know how many times people have come to me going, well, I was told this. And I'm like, I don't even know where you're getting that.
You know,
That's just not how that fundamentally works. And these folks are like, well, I spent thousands of dollars trying to get it done. And it's like, yeah, that's never going to get done.
yeah.
That's not a real thing. There's no way to solve that particular problem in this way. We can take it over here and solve it a different way because this may be what that's for. But at the end of the day, it to me, it seems like we are kind of also at a cusp where we're rocketing forward so fast that people don't have the fortitude or ability to check sources anymore or to be able to verify things that they're being told. Like that lawyer. That lawyer probably did 1,000 different briefings for some lower level court somewhere, put one together and was like, I don't need to,
Yeah.
need to check it. It was right all those other times. And then he sends it in and it's completely and utterly wrong.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
When you learn to trust something and then in turn it lies to you, it's a whole totally different story at the end of the day.
One thing that was really useful to me, and I used Windows Copilot a lot this past year. Kind of as a search engine. I was drafting. I'd been working this for a number of years. My latest book, that was actually in the announcement of the podcast, The 5 Pillars Leadership for Effective Custom Software. And I was writing it all this year. I kind of had a weekly cadence of writing it. And I use Windows Copilot all the time to find the right source, because I've read hundreds of books and I have so much experience that I've got this idea in my head and I'm thinking, oh, this is the right way to explain it. I'm like, wait a minute, where did I first learn about this concept that I rely so deeply on all the time? And it helped me to track down the original research papers, the original text that introduced that idea to the industry that then a whole lot built on, so that I could provide those footnotes and cite the proper sources instead of just saying, well, this is what Jeffrey thinks. So it was really useful to find all those.
Yeah, I sat down and I found a paper I wrote back when I went through school on CAN networks and the beginning of network technology. And it was amazing to me to read that, knowing what I know today.
Yeah.
And just kind of going through all of that and how the universities were connected and why it came up and where it started. And I just sat there going, wow, the times before Chat GPT or blogging or any of this stuff were stuff that you wrote when you felt things meant things in a different light.
Mm-hmm.
And then you read, something that you wrote 30 plus years ago, and you're just like, wow.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point.
How far we've come.
That's a good point, because if there was a GPT model that was trained with that paper, it would be very relevant for that document to be tagged with, this was a really young person who was still figuring things out when he drafted it. Whereas you just don't know if there's any kind of tagging on the strength of that information versus something written by a grade school person, a high school person, a college student, a 23-year-old PhD student versus a 50-year-old industry expert. There's a different quality in the writings of each different type of person.
God, I remember it was like in 2010. I forgot the time period, but I did a bird of a feathers at a tech ed. That's how old that was, back when they had tech ed. And I remember
Ignite replaced tech ed.
Right. Well, yeah, Ignite. So, but it was the original tech eds.
Yep.
And I was doing a bird of a feather, and I brought up the word PaaS. And somebody goes, that's not a real word. And I'm like, you're correct, but I call it PaaS because it's platform as a service.
Yep.
And then lo and behold, years after that got adopted out as platform as a service, but I brought it up well before it was ever a thing.
Yeah.
Because I looked at it as being that.
Mhm.
It was like I remember talking to Visual Studio Group back when they were doing their first announcement on, I forgot what version of .NET it was. I think it was 3. It was way back. And the cloud had first come out, and I said, one of the good things that would be up there is you should move all your BizTalk stuff up there, because that seems to me like a very good engine for that. And they're like, yeah, we won't do that. And I'm like, well, that was a quick answer to me throwing out ideas.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is that? And they go, well, we've got a lot of people that invest in this. And then lo and behold, Logic Apps came out, right? You and I both know the
Yeah.
Logic App side, just talking more innovation. And I thought the funniest thing in the world was, if you go back and use the connectors in the older versions of the Logic Apps, they still had the BizTalk namespace in them.
Right. Yeah.
And you just kind of look back and you go, wow, I remember getting shut down that day I brought that up. And now here we are at that point. And, going back to our technology and technology adoptions, which brought us here. Look at all the times people said, no, that's not going to happen. And it does.
Yeah.
Right. And you want to talk about where the future's going. I think the future's bright in the technology arena, because the funny thing is, I think it's going to go places you and I haven't even conceived yet.
Of course.
Or even have sat down, because we've been at this business so long. We got a lot that we still stare off in our rearview mirror, and we still keep our faces going forward, but we're missing a lot of things because we still have a lot of that history and context that keeps us focused on a very narrow path for the path that we're on. And sometimes we don't always see the turnoffs and the things that are around us. So it's going to be very interesting to me to see where the future comes out of all of this.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what are we going to see in the rest of our lifetime? With all that we've seen up to this point, what's going to be that next thing that we see that we just go, wow?
But it's a great time to be a software engineer. It's a great time for custom software.
Exactly.
And it's a great time to be using Azure and everything else that comes with it.
Yep. Hey, look, if you're not using AI, Azure, .NET libraries, and doing rapid development on your software, you're making a lot of mistakes, because that's where the future is going to take it at the end of the day. So it is what it is.
Nice. Well, Greg, thanks for coming back on the Azure and DevOps podcast. I appreciate it. It was a great discussion.
Yes, sir.
And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.